Hello there. I have the unit apart. I made some changes to it and I'm going to put it back together, and I wanted to show you what the changes were before I put it back together. So let me put you up here where it's more stable. So one of the things I talked about before was putting these rollers on here, which I did. You see the little black mark there. Before I had that piece in there, and it was just a piece that looked like this and had a hole in it with a undercut for the head of the screw, and when it was rotating, the screw was rotating and it locked up. I believe that was the problem with the motor controller. I mentioned that before, but I put in these bearings in here, so I was able to lock these screws down, and there's a space in there so the bearing can still rotate. So the belt's going to come in here, go around that one pulley, go around, come back out, and I move this one pulley closer so that the teeth on this unit here, there's more engagement by putting the belt closer together here, instead of being, it was the hole was over here before. So I think that's a big improvement there. And this motor that rotates it this way, before I had these screws that went through this plastic, and when you snug the screw down, of course you got a honeycomb in there, and it doesn't really allow the screw to get tight. I don't know if you can see that honeycomb in there, but it's what same thing as here. It's all honeycomb. So what I do is I epoxy some brass solid pieces through there so that the brass goes all the way through the part. So when you tighten that screw down, you're tightening it down on a solid piece to help hold that motor in place, because when I took it apart, those screws were a little bit loose, because like I said, this plastic, you can't tighten it because it just collapses. So I epoxied those 4 brass pieces in there to give it more strength. Then I added this piece on the top. There's one on this side, and there's one over here for the other side, and that houses this piece, which now has roller bearings on it, and that mounts on top there for my belt adjustment. So that worked out real good. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I trued up this surface here. I think I did mention it. I trued that up. And I added this bearing on here, which fits onto here. That was that little spherical thing I was working on. And I aligned this bearing in this bore, this brass bore, which was the original bore. I made this little piece here so that fit in the brass bore, and then the end of it fits on the end of the bearing. So that when I epoxied that bearing in there, that held it true to that bore. So now I got that brass bearing in there. The ball bearing to rotate on that shaft. That's an improvement. And the other thing I did was I added a piece in here. Now before I had this piece as a spacer that fit there. Then there was another one on the other side. This one. And that fit there. And then I had this piece on this side and the other piece on this side. And what I was trying to do was the belt that is in here, I wanted to give it more engagement on that back piece, that back pulley, which is here. So by doing the same principle as I did here, I'm adding another pulley here and another pulley here to squeeze that belt a little bit tighter so that it comes from the inside, goes around that pulley and goes back. Because one of the things I was thinking might be happening or could happen is that this belt, I'll use this big one because you could probably see it better. But before it was just coming straight out like that. So by bringing the pulley in here, it's giving a little more engagement in the pulley. And plus the fact that I have to keep that really, to make that adjustment, you got to keep it tight because you don't want that slipping. And with this belt coming straight, you have to, make it a little bit tighter. But with if it came together like this, it wouldn't have to be so tight because, like I said, you have more engagement on the teeth. So that's a little piece that I made. I made this piece to take the place of these spacers. And this piece is going to bolt in on top of there. And there's these two little bearing bores that these little bearings are going to fit onto. And then these pieces are going to fit onto that bearing. The bearing is going to ride on these two little protrusions sticking out of this piece. And then this piece gets pressed onto the outside of the bearing. I know it's probably kind of hard to see it. But when I made this, I put a little step down there so the bearing wouldn't go all the way to the bottom. There's I think 30 thousandths gap. You got the bottom piece, then there's a 30 thousandths edge, and then the 250 diameter for the bearing to fit onto. That's a 250 ID, a 1/2 inch OD on both of those. Because I didn't want the bearing riding on the bottom surface. So that's going to go in there. And like I said, this bearing fits on here, this one side. Then there's a bearing on the other side. And then this piece that's going to fit over that bearing. So that's going to bring that belt in a little bit tighter. And well, the problem with that now is that I can't use my encoder mount because now that's in the way. So I made up these two little pieces that I'm going to glue to the encoder. They go on each side, and they attach to those screws. Originally, I talked about a long time ago building some type of bridge across here to attach that encoder card, and then I came up with this idea. So I'm going to have to go back to this idea, and we'll see how that works out. That's a 30-second aluminum, and you can get a lot of this small stuff at the hobby shop. You know, they K&S. This is a 32 4x8. And it was real easy to bend because it's pretty soft. And for the encoder card, you know, you don't need a lot of strength there. You just need something to hold it in place. I thought about 3D printing this and all that, but you know, because it's got an angle on there, and you know, it's got a flat there and a flat there, it'd be really hard to print, and it's really a lot easier just to cut a piece on the bandsaw, put a slot in it, and bend it. Real easy to bend, and the bandsaw kind of bit me back here. Got a nice little slice here. It's not that I got hit by the bandsaw. I was cutting something and the part moved and it slipped and it cut my finger. And yeah, I remember I told you the bandsaw was your friend. Well, it wasn't my friend that day. But anyway, you know, I talked about this piece that houses that shaft, and that's what this pulley rides on. And I couldn't find that needle bearing. I looked in all my stuff. I looked out in the garage. I looked here. I looked there. I couldn't find it. You know, I really couldn't imagine, you know, how I lost it. No, I can't imagine one bit how I lost that thing. So anyway, I wanted to put a bearing in there, and I didn't really want to order another one because it would have been the price of the bearing plus the $10 because I didn't have the $30 minimum order. And so I ended up making a new one of these, and I made it with the with a bearing. I got some of these 8mm ID bearings, and so I had to make this block, and I pressed the shaft into the bearing, then I pressed the bearing into the block. So that's going to fit in there. Actually, it fits from the underneath. And that's my new piece for my adjustment. That bearing is, you can put pressure on that bearing either to the front or to the back, and it still rotates really easy. As to where this bushing I had, I mean, it was a temporary thing just to try it out. And you put a little pressure on that shaft and it starts, you got a little resistance there. I talked about that before. But I put those two holes in there so I could punch that bushing out, and then put the bearing in place, but I couldn't find it, so I had to make a new one of these. But, you know, it is what it is, so it'll work. It'll work a lot better this way. And I ordered some, these are the pieces I had on these parts here. This is where the fitting goes for the tubing that activates the brake on both sides of here, and this rotates. There's one on each side, and I had number 8 tubing because that's what I had to work with before. So I ordered some number 4, and I got that in. Number 4 tubing, and I got the fittings. Got the fittings, the 90-degree and the straight, so I can put this number 4 tubing in instead of the number 8, which will give it a little more flexibility. And I don't know, I can't think of anything else. But I wanted to show that because when I put this together, it's going to be a little bit harder to see it. And I can't think of anything. So I guess that's it. All right, well, I'm going to put this together, and we'll take another look at it. Oh, that didn't take long, like 2 seconds. Well, that's what it looks like, and it actually works quite well. There's like little resistance on there at all. When I first did this, there was a lot of resistance in there, and that's why I had to put this bigger pulley on there. But yeah, it works really well now. All right.